Sheikh Hamdan cried when she left. His wife was in the next room, he cried. Sheikh Hamdan, the crown prince of Dubai, the man whose public composure has never once fully broken, in any visible way across years of public life that have included losses that would have broken most people, cried. Not in the desert, not in the private hours of a night when he was alone, and the performance had been suspended, and the only witness was the dark. In a room, in the palace, in a space that was surrounded on all sides by the ongoing official life, by the staff and the schedule and the requirements of the role that does not pause for private grief. He cried in that space with the specific knowledge, present and impossible to set aside even in the middle of the grief, that his wife was in the next room, that the woman his father had chosen for him, the woman who carried his official title, the woman who had been living alongside the private life, without knowing its full shape, was separated from the sound of what she was not supposed to know about by a single wall. He cried for the woman who had just left, in the room next to the woman who had never been permitted to know she existed. She had left that day, not the beginning of the London arrangement, not the formal managed departure that the palace had organized around the need to separate the private world from the official geography, something earlier, a leaving that preceded the official arrangement, a moment when she made the decision that the specific form of the relationship had become something she could not continue in as it was, not forever, not as a permanent departure, but as a necessary pause that said, I need to be somewhere that is not this. I need to step back from the form this has taken and find a way to breathe outside of it. She left, not to London yet, somewhere, away from the specific geometry of a private life that had become impossible in the specific way that private lives become impossible when the official world increases its pressure on them until the space available for the private world is no longer sufficient for what the private world needs to survive. He had known she was going before she went. That is the specific suffering of a departure that has been discussed before it happens. The knowledge that the person is going to leave before they actually leave, the days of carrying the future departure alongside the present presence, the specific impossible quality of being with someone who you know is going to be absent and being unable to make the absence not come because the coming of it has already been decided. He had known, and the knowing had not made the actual leaving any smaller when it arrived. It rarely does. The anticipation of loss does not prepare a person for the loss itself. It simply adds the weight of the anticipation to the weight of the actual thing. She left in the specific way of their connection, without drama, without the kind of visible departure that would have created consequences in the official world that surrounded the private one, quietly, with the movement that the private world has always required of its exits, contained, managed from within the leaving itself, carrying the grief of the departure without performing it for any audience. She left, and the door of the private space closed behind her, and the room was empty in the way that a room becomes empty when the person who was in it was the reason the room felt like it contained anything worth being in. He did not go to another room immediately. He stayed where she had been, in the specific stillness of someone who has just watched something end and is standing in the immediate aftermath of the ending, before the forward motion of the ongoing life has reasserted its claim on their attention. He stayed, and the staying produced what the staying produced The specific release of grief that a composed, managed, permanently performing man does not get many opportunities to have. And that arrives, when it arrives, with the full force of everything it has been held, back from arriving as during all the time the holding back was required, he cried, quietly, in the specific way of someone who is crying in a space that is not fully private, not the full release of someone who is alone, but the compressed, controlled version of grief that a person produces when they need to feel something and are not in a context that allows the feeling to be fully unconstrained. He was aware through the grief of where he was, of the wall, of what was on the other side of the wall. His wife was in the next room, living her portion of the official life without knowing that the grief she would not have recognized and had no official framework for understanding was happening this close to her. He was crying for a woman his wife did not know existed, in a room adjacent to the woman who had been placed in his life as the official version of what the private one had always actually been. The simultaneity of it, the crying and the next room and the wife and the leaving and the wall between them, is the detail that most precisely captures the specific nature of his situation, not the big dramatic moments, not the confrontations or the discoveries or the palace decisions that are the events of the official story. This, a man crying in one room for the woman who just left while his wife is in the next room not knowing. The private grief and the official life separated by a wall. The most personal moment and the most managed one existing simultaneously on opposite sides of a single surface. That is, the specific impossibility of what his life has always required him to carry. Not in the abstract, in the physical, specific, room by room reality of a palace where two worlds have always been present simultaneously and neither has ever been fully aware of the other. His wife did not hear it. Or if she heard something, some quality of the silence next door that was different from the ordinary silence of an empty room. She did not understand what she was hearing. She went about the portion of the day that was hers to go about, unaware that the man she had officially married was on the other side of a wall grieving a departure that the official story had no record of. Unaware that the distance she felt from him, the distance she had always felt, the distance that had been there from the first day, and that she had spent the marriage had a specific, present, crying source in the room next to hers. He stayed in the room until the grief had done what grief does when it is given the space it needs, moved through the worst of itself and into the quieter part that follows. And then he composed himself, in the way he has always composed himself, with the specific practiced efficiency of a man who has had to move from private grief to public composure more times than the composure should have ever been required to survive. He stood. He put the official version of himself back on. He walked out of the room. And his wife in the next room never knew. Subscribe to this channel and hit the bell. Every week I bring you the real story of Sheikh Hamdan. The rooms where the grief happened. The walls that separated the private from the official. And the truth about what a man carries when the two worlds he is living in exist this close together and neither one knows the full shape of the other.